Hi, it's Dwyer. It is August 11th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, the world has come full circle. Let me make a few points on this upcoming fight between Big Baby Jarrell Miller and Michael Hunter. Right, first, the United States right now is in a depression in heavyweight boxing. Right, the rest of the world has passed us by. Joe Parker, a guy who does not have the belt, would likely be the best fighter in the United States if he were in the United States, right? Because he beat Zhilei Zhang. Understand, I know Zhilei Zhang views himself as China's best fighter, but Zhilei Zhang lives in New Jersey. Folks, right now, because Zhang beat Deontay Wilder in my unofficial ratings, right, the stuff I go by in looking at fights, Zhilei Zhang is the best American heavyweight. Right, let me just say, America is a country flooded with immigrants. I myself am an immigrant to the United States. I don't understand the argument that Zhilei Zhang is not an American heavyweight. Well, two of the guys on the short list for the best American heavyweight of the moment were the two guys calling themselves Big Baby. Right? You had the original Big Baby in boxing, right? We understand there was a Big Baby in the NBA. You had Jarrell Miller. And you had Jared Anderson. They were actually set to fight. Anderson decided to pull out. That could be for a host of reasons. Right? This is boxing. It could be based on an injury. This is boxing. It could be based on a better deal down the road that he's decided to pursue instead. Right? This is boxing. This is also life. It could be based on personal drama. Right? That girlfriend who's making your life miserable, you're thinking about her, you're not thinking about sparring, you're not thinking about your profession. When the phone rings, you're not ready to fight Jarrell Miller. Right? Could be a host of reasons. But understand what has happened as a result. And I believe this is a stunner. This man could be a boogeyman. The powers that be decided to tap a good friend of Jarrell Miller's, Michael Hunter. Right now, this is a name you need to know. Right now, boxing has several layers. Let me lay this out. Michael Hunter has much more upside than Jarrell Miller in my eyes. He was actually in the running to be Kubrat Pulev's next opponent. Now that's very important, because when the phone rings, you don't want the guy answering to be on the sofa with a bag of potato chips watching TV. Right? When the phone rings, you want the guy to be in the gym sparring, either for an upcoming fight for him or an upcoming fight for the other guy. Right? Just understand that Michael Hunter was already looking at possibly a career-making opportunity because Kubrat Pulev has one of the minor heavyweight titles. And instead, he gets to fight Jarrell Miller. Let me also say this diplomatically. We're in an era, different eras have different flavors, right? This is all one man's opinion. Please feel free to disagree with me in the comment section. But this has been a big, clunky heavyweight era that has prioritized power. Right? You have guys in the heavyweight division who, are blessed punchers. AJ, Deontay Wilder. But who, when a new trainer, let's say Robert Garcia comes along, has to tell the fighter, look, you need to bend your knees. Right? Understand you have several guys. McMudoff, for example. Um, you saw that while he's a great grappler, if this were about wrestling, he might be champion. But you saw that he can't really fight in transition. Right? Older guys with some skills, Derek Chisora, for example, are able to hang around this generation because this generation is more brawn than skill. Now you have some skilled fighters out there, right? Tyson Fury, for example, he's highly skilled. But let's be diplomatic here. Tyson Fury is a guy who went through a period of time with major weight problems. He went through a period of time with mental health problems, right? He won the title and wasn't healthy enough to fight in a rematch against the guy he dominated. You would have thought, rather than hit the pub after winning the title, rather than pursuing some Andy Ruiz type of approach to the sport, you thought that getting the belt around his waist would lead Tyson Fury, who had the talent, to then go on a run where, he looks like Ali from the 1960s. He didn't. He vanished. Then he was in Boxing Siberia. Anthony Joshua took over the heavyweight division. Then, of course, Tyson Fury comes back, has to cross the ocean rather than the lineal. Didn't have the power to say, come fight me in my backyard. He had to cross the ocean to fight WBC champion Deontay Wilder. Right? It's only in this era that you could have a 5-year heavyweight champion, and understand what that means. In 5 years, even if the fighter's a cherry picker, to keep the title, he would have to fight mandatories. Right? It's only in an era like this one that Deontay Wilder could have a major belt, the WBC belt, for 5 years and have, I would say, at least 40% of the fan base questioning whether he's a Hall of Famer. You simply can't imagine a guy in the 1970s having the heavyweight title, a major belt, the WBC belt, for 5 years in the 70s, and there being any question on whether he's a Hall of Famer. But there is in this era. So what I want people to do is to think about the toughest fights Alexander Usyk has had at heavyweight. Just take a moment and think about the toughest sequences. I'm just telling you from this seat, the toughest fight he had wasn't even at heavyweight. It's Maris Briedis. Right? Truth be told, Maris Briedis is a future Hall of Famer. Great fighter. Right? But what I want people to do is to go to my favorites folder right now. And you're going to see his fight from several years ago at cruiserweight against the guy who would go on to beat Martin Bakole. And the early rounds of that fight, Usyk against Michael Hunter, the same Michael Hunter who's Jarrell Miller's friend, features a level of movement. Both guys are moving. A guy who's actually there to box, Alexander Usyk. A guy who is jumping in the pocket, not trying to knock out Usyk, which is what AJ tried to do, which is what Tyson Fury in their first fight tried to do. Everyone sees Usyk and they view him as undersized at heavyweight. Folks, believe it or not, Usyk's been more dominant at heavyweight than he was at cruiserweight. I believe the public has it wrong here. When he was a cruiserweight, I was here online talking about how he'd be dangerous at heavyweight. Just like I know right now J.O. Pataya would be dangerous at heavyweight. Because you don't have a lot of Ezzard Charleses these days in the heavyweight division. You don't have the small guy who can dodge your shots, make you miss, outbox you, make you look big and clunky. You have the opposite, right? You have the Charles Martins of the world who, are trying to outslug you. You have the Jared Andersons of the world who are trying to outslug you, who have the attitude of, hey, look, man, I'm 6'4", I'm 6'5", I'm 6'6", I'm 6'7". I'm too big for you, right? You don't have the guy who, Larry Holmes, for example, who's going to get on his toes and outdance you. Have you realizing by the third round that you can't even form a pocket. Is going to be riddling you with jabs. Is going to be beating you not with brawn, but with skill. Now let me just make a couple of points here. Michael Hunter is a poker player. There are layers to his game. This fight against Jarrell Miller is unbettable. This is that rare fight at heavyweight where I can say if Hunter wins, things will get a lot more interesting in the heavyweight division. And understand, this is a 37-year-old who doesn't have the big power. He's relying on skill, angles, reflexes. Right? This is the odd duck. But just understand, if you watch this guy, he's either excruciatingly unprepared for a fight. Right? Understand, the storyline that he hasn't lost a fight for years is false. There's a video of a fight in 2024. It was for the IBA championship. It's because it's the IBA that the fight's not recognized. He was fighting a guy named Artem Suslenko. Right? In fact, it's Arnold Suslenkov. Right? I'm making the effort on pronunciation. Folks, Hunter looked terrible in that fight. Hunter lost that fight. Right? In my eyes, he had the Jerry Forrest fight won. Right? That's the level of opposition he's been fighting. But then he faded late in that fight. That fight ended up a draw. Right? The Cassius Chaney fight, Chaney couldn't move. Chaney was more immobile than Andy Ruiz. Right? If you have no foot speed, you have no shot on Michael Hunter. Right? So let me just say, if the Hunter who showed up to fight Artem Suslenkov shows up to fight Jarrell Miller on boxing's biggest stage this year, right, folks? If you thought the, Dubois Usyk fight was big, and I'll agree. There's the heavyweight division, then there's everything else. There's the heavyweight champion, and there's everyone else. Folks, this Canelo Crawford fight should be off the chain. Should be at least on par with Dubois Usyk. Right? I'll concede the UK right now is the center of the boxing universe. I'll concede the United States typically can't compete. But you have an unbeaten fighter who, if he wins, and it's a big if, his name is going to be exalted to the point where we're going to hear about him with the Leonards, with the Mayweathers, right, with the Robinsons. This is a huge jump for Terence Crawford. And he's fighting, and let's be objective here, because I know Canelo's been getting roughed up for some reason by the boxing media. I'm not sure if I get it. He's fighting one of the best pound for pound. And he's fighting Canelo not only in Canelo's backyard. I know Canelo is Mexican, folks. He's the fighter right now who owns Las Vegas. Right? You're fighting Canelo not only in his backyard, but you're fighting Canelo in his division. Crawford is visiting the division. Right? Understand, on that card, you have this fight. Big Baby against Michael Hunter. Most of the public doesn't know who Michael Hunter is. Right? If Hunter has been on the couch eating potato chips, he's going to lose this fight. But if Hunter has been in the gym thinking, hey, I can beat Kubrat Pulev, I can get a share of the title, then I'll take my chances with whoever. Right? We're in an era where, folks, look at the list of fighters who Moses Atama has fought. You're going to see several guys you don't know. And yet, he's an overwhelming favorite against Dillian White. Right? That's today's heavyweight division. You know, you look at guys, and there are moments where the truth seeps out. Right? If you want to see Joe Joyce look completely lost in a rematch against a guy who already beat him, look at Joe Joyce in the rematch against Zhilei Zhang. You wouldn't even know that Joe Joyce had fought the guy already. That's the heavyweight division we're in. I tell people, and they think I'm crazy. I say, hey, Philippe Ergovic is one of the best heavyweights out there. Lawrence Okoli has an awfully good shot at becoming a heavyweight champion. And people look at me dumbfounded. They, and this is in a division where Anajit Kabayel was able to beat Makhmudov off body shots. He then fights Zhilei Zhang. You thought Zhang would have looked at video and said, you know what, I got to stop this guy from hitting me in the body. You thought Zhang would come in and have a hand draped across his body, would be prepared for that. You thought Kabayel would actually have to beat Zhang off headshots. No, he beat Zhang off body shots. That's today's heavyweight division. Right, so understand. You have more guys with a shot at the title than you think. Right? You have a champion, Alexander Usyk, who, apart from the first Tyson Fury fight and the Derek Chisora fight, has pretty much been unchallenged. Right? Pretty much been unchallenged at heavyweight. And understand, he's a Terence Crawford figure. He's coming up from a different division, the cruiserweight division. Right? Think about that. It's preposterous. So, let's talk about why this fight's unbettable. Right? First off, Hunter is a fighter who is so unique that it's the unfamiliarity that places you in danger. In other words, his fights follow a pattern where he comes out, he's unusual, the other fighter tends to look lost. You get to the middle rounds, the other fighter's completely thrown off his game. You'd be surprised how many guys just fall apart at that moment. Right? Then, of course, the other guy comes back a little bit, but Hunter then makes adjustments because understand he's not what he seems. This is the guy who looks like an amateur deliberately. Right? So if you look at the Martin Bakole fight, folks, you're going to see Bakole pretty much out on his feet late in the fight. Bakole who's aggressive. Bakole who has unique skills himself. He's a long-range hooker. Bakole was baffled in that fight. Hunter eventually takes over late. You're looking at the fight, and Hunter looks like an amateur in trouble. Then you realize the guy who's in trouble is actually his opponent. But understand the problem here. These two guys are friends. I know there are no reports online of them ever sparring together. Folks, that's an impossibility. Right? Two guys the same age, contemporaries, both coming up. Right? Jarrell Miller doing whatever he can to get an advantage on the rest of the division. I have no doubt Jarrell Miller knows that his good buddy is immensely talented. I'm positive that these guys have sparred. I'm positive these guys know each other's games. Right? Understand, you don't have the typical advantage that you would have with Michael Hunter in this fight. The other thing, too, is, he's looked so bad, to me at least, against non-elite competition. In fairness to Jerry Forrest, he did earn the draw after getting knocked down 3 times by Zhilei Zhang. Right? If you had an American box-off, and I understand Forrest lost to Jared Anderson, right? But if you had an American box-off, Jerry Forrest, because he beat Zhilei Zhang, because he got draws with Zhilei Zhang and Michael Hunter, would deserve to be in that box-off. Right? But let's just say Jerry Forrest isn't on par with the top heavyweights right now, the Joe Parkers of the world. Right? Understand, Michael Hunter has not been fighting elites since the Alexander Povetkin fight. And that fight, he had that fight won. This is a disturbing trend. He had that fight won, and then Povetkin came back on him. The Usyk fight, understand Hunter's explanation. He had just become a father. He hadn't trained properly. What I want people to do is to look at the first 6 rounds of Hunter against Usyk. Right? You're going to see dynamics you have not seen in any Usyk fight at heavyweight. Right? The first 6 rounds are competitive. Right? Hunter is a tough out. Usyk takes over in the second half of the fight. Hunter wants you to believe that fatherhood didn't allow him to properly prepare for the fight. The post-fight interviews, Hunter's interviews on that fight against Usyk, is some of the best breakdown on Usyk I've seen. Right? Hunter credits Usyk for his professionalism, for his stamina. Right? But Hunter doesn't feel that Usyk's skill set is that off the page. Well, let's talk about what makes Hunter special, and it's worth watching. Again, I'm not betting on this fight. It is too dangerous. But I can tell you, I view Jarrell Miller as a predictable fighter. Daniel Dubois knew that Jarrell Miller was going to come in the pocket and try to overpower him. Right? Whatever Jarrell Miller is doing, you see Jarrell Miller and he's roaming around the ring and stuff like that, you know eventually he's going to throw jabs and he's going to try to impose himself on you. Right? He's so obvious to me, it's one of these things where you come out in the first round, you see him on his back foot moving around the ring. If a fighter were, figuratively speaking, wearing a watch, the fighter could say, okay, this is Jarrell Miller in this round. I'll give him another 2 minutes to come in the pocket and to try to slug it out with me. Hunter's different. Hunter is an arm's length or more away from you. He's deliberately off rhythm. If you want to see an on rhythm Hunter on his front foot, look at the opening rounds of his fight against Povetkin, where he takes the fight to Povetkin. That's when you realize you're dealing with a guy who has different modes. But the Hunter who's himself most of the time is herky-jerky, looks awkward, is standing far enough away from you and has enough jerkiness and unpredictability where you can't counter him reliably. Right? He has body control, so he's not parallel to you. This is not David Benavidez. This is the guy who is at a side profile, and he's looking like he has a seizure. I'm not kidding. Right? So you don't know when to throw your shot because he's changed the timing. Then, of course, as you'll see in the Usyk film, he can jump in the pocket. He can land some shots on you. The angles are awkward. He holds his hand strange. The great basketball player, Bill Russell, had a core saying. He said the great ones are always different. This guy is different. Right? So he's looking unorthodox. He's looking spasmodic. But then suddenly he can come inside and land 2-3 shots on you. Then, of course, he's a master at exiting the pocket from the side door. This is not the guy who's going straight back. This is the guy who jumps in the pocket, then he's exiting at odd angles. Then he subtly changes the angles to hit you with harder shots. Right? Folks, he beat Martin Bakole. You let this guy get started. You give him a win on this stage, a Crawford-Canelo stage in front of a packed Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, right? Particularly after the slow summer that Vegas has had, right? You have Hunter beat Jarrell Miller on this stage. And folks, the heavyweight division will be really reconfigured. Right? I'm not sure as I sit here if Daniel Dubois can beat Hunter if Hunter is in shape. Right? Understand, Hunter is open to the rematch against Martin Bakole. Right? You know, let's just say things get interesting. If Hunter looks good, there are going to be some people saying, whoa, this guy gave Usyk a tougher 6-round set than any heavyweight other than Fury in the first 6 rounds. Right? This isn't a guy who comes in and smothers an opponent like Chisora did against Usyk. No, this is the guy who's herky-jerky to the point where it threw Usyk off his game. The other thing, too, to notice is that, folks, cruisers fight at a faster pace than heavyweights in general. Right? I'm not saying a cruiser fights at a faster pace than, Prime Ali or Larry Holmes, right? No, guys with jabs who tend to fight faster. No, I'm saying, you look at Hunter's pacing and you understand, an Anthony Joshua would have a problem against him. Right? He's awkward. The awkwardness is an illusion. So, this fight is a must-watch fight, particularly for American boxing. Right? Because understand, I'm here telling you Zhilei Zhang is probably the best American fighter out there. there's a question, for me at least, on whether Richard Torres has a back foot. Right? Big Baby, who knows what's going on? My understanding on Big Baby is he's still growing up emotionally. Right? I'm talking about Jared Anderson. Right? He's still growing up emotionally. The heavyweight division is not where the UK is right now. That's the center of the universe. Right? If Fabio Wardley would show up in the United States, would look around and would ask himself, is this all there is right now? Right? Zhilei Zhang, I'm not sure if Zhilei Zhang understands that he's the best American heavyweight. He keeps talking about Chinese power. Right? Player, look around you. You've already beaten Wilder. There's nobody in the country in which you're living full time who can compete with you. Right? Understand, Caballero is an American. Right? It's like that Caballero loss doesn't mean that you're not the best in the United States. Well, Michael Hunter has the capability. My fear with Hunter is that power is the last to go. Right? So you see a Zhilei Zhang, he's older. You see a Deontay Wilder, he's older. And you say, well, this KG vet only has to catch one of these young guns with some power shots and they can win the fight. Hunter is the guy who doesn't have the big power. This is the older guy who's relying on reflexes, angles, coordination. Right? I don't get the feeling that Hunter keeps himself in the best condition. Right? The fact that he's talking about, how having a kid interfered with his shot at the cruiserweight title might reveal his priorities. Look, becoming a father is a big deal. Right? But if you're going to take the fight when you're an unbeaten fighter, and understand officially, even though I told you Hunter lost the fight to Artem Sislenkov, officially, believe it or not, that Usyk loss is the only loss on Hunter's record. Right? You're an unbeaten fighter. You're fighting an unbeaten cruiserweight champion. And you fade in the second half of the fight like Hunter did. I'm telling you, even if you just became a father, there are many fighters in the sport of boxing who would never mention that as an excuse for fading in the second half of a fight. Right? They'd never mention it. This is a sport where, Larry Holmes, when he was older and came back to the sport, once wore a contact lens into a match because Larry's eyes were that bad. Right? We only know about it now, years later. Right? Joe Frazier was blind in one eye. You never heard about that in the 1970s. And Frazier was having blood and guts fights. Right? Look at that Thriller in Manila. Folks, that fight was scheduled for 15 rounds. Right? Frazier couldn't answer the bell for the 15th round. There is no post-fight interview where Frazier talks about being blind in one eye. Right? Hunter strikes me as an eccentric. So, of course, now he talks about, I wasn't really ready for that fight. Really? You weren't ready for your shot at the title against an Olympic gold medalist who's unbeaten and has the belt? So this is a rare talent. If he comes in ready, folks, the heavyweight division should be on notice. Right? He's too mobile for Andy Ruiz. Right? He is too awkward and too fluid for AJ. AJ would have to catch him to beat him. Right? I actually believe that Tyson Fury is retired unless he gets an invitation to fight Usyk a third time. Right? Folks, Usyk's top of the food chain at heavyweight. This guy gave Usyk 6 of his most competitive rounds. Right? Hunter is a better matchup against Usyk than most of the heavyweight division. Right? Food for thought. This is a must-watch fight. It actually has more important repercussions for the division it's in than the Crawford Canelo fight. I suspect that if Crawford wins, Crawford's going to vacate immediately. If Canelo wins, we're going to view the fight as a mismatch that, is on par with Jermell Charlo. Understand, Canelo has already faced an undisputed champion from a lighter weight class, right? We'll view it like Jermell Charlo against Canelo. Right? This fight, whoever wins this fight, if it's Jarrell Miller supposedly coming off a shoulder injury that was so serious that he couldn't fight Fabio Wardley, right? If it's Jarrell Miller, well, Miller's had canceled fights against AJ, right? Canceled fight against Fabio Wardley. Miller is a big guy who, is likely to outweigh his opponent. Just food for thought. Miller has shown up for fights weighing over 300 pounds. Miller would be in play if Hunter wins this fight. Folks, the heavyweight division would then have a problem, right? Because this is a guy who, unless you catch him, he's going to beat many of the bigger names. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.